Jonathan Roumie pushed open the heavy oak doors, their creak echoing through the cavernous silence of the old New Orleans church. Flickering candlelight cast a soft golden glow across the gray stone walls, creating shadows that danced like whispers. The air carried a faint scent of incense mingling with the cool night chill. Jonathan, his long, wavy brown hair falling past his shoulders and his beard neatly trimmed, wore a black suit jacket over a white shirt, a large gold cross necklace gleaming at his chest. His footsteps clicked on the stone floor, each one stirring the stillness of the sacred space. "Why am I here?" he whispered to himself, his voice low, almost lost in the vastness. The question wasn't casual, he genuinely didn't know. For months an unseen force had tugged at him, drawing him toward moments like this, places where he, an actor renowned for playing Jesus in The Chosen, rarely came alone. He was used to stage lights, prayer gatherings, and crowds, but tonight felt different. Something intangible like a quiet call had led him to this church. He stopped halfway down the aisle, his breath catching. His eyes swept over the empty wooden pews, then settled on the large crucifix above the altar. The figure of Jesus, serene yet piercing, seemed to gaze directly at him. Something about that crucifix stripped him bare, as if his fame, his faith, his confidence were peeled away. For the first time in years, Jonathan felt small. Doubts, triumphs, failures, they pressed down on him, heavy and unyielding. He sank into a pew, his hands covering his face. Then he heard it. His heartbeat thundered in his ears, drowning out the silence of the church. Jonathan froze, trying to convince himself it was nothing, a trick of exhaustion from long days on set. But a voice, gentle yet commanding, resonated in his mind. "Why do you doubt?" It didn't come from the air around him, but from somewhere deep within, pressing against his chest. His body stiffened, eyes wide, scanning the empty church. Not a soul in sight. Only the trembling candle flames and the cold stillness. "Is someone there?" he called, his voice bouncing off the stone walls louder than he'd meant. He swallowed hard, waiting. Nothing. He turned slowly, his gaze darting across the pews, the shadows stretching long across the floor. No one. Yet the sense of a presence clung to him, undeniable and real. He wasn't alone. "Why do you doubt?" The voice came again, clearer now, like a command wrapped in tenderness. Jonathan spun around, heart racing, searching for the source. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice trembling. "If you're real, show yourself." The silence held unbroken by any sound. But it wasn't empty, it felt alive, as if waiting for him to grasp something just beyond his reach. His eyes were drawn back to the crucifix. The figure of Jesus seemed to shimmer in the dim light, its wooden eyes almost alive, fixed on him. His legs shook, but he forced himself toward the altar, each step heavy, like walking through an invisible trial. "You've built your life on answers," the voice said, closer now, as if whispering directly to his soul. "But not every question has one." Jonathan gripped the back of a pew, his knuckles white. "What does that mean?" he asked, barely above a whisper. A strange warmth began to spread through him, starting in his chest and radiating outward. It wasn't comforting, it was challenging, as if peeling away layers of armor he hadn't known he wore. "You've touched the stars," the voice continued, calm but unwavering, "but you've ignored the ground beneath your feet." The words struck deep, stirring something within him. Jonathan thought of all he'd done portraying Jesus, sharing faith, inspiring millions through The Chosen. Yet beneath it all, there was a restlessness, a nagging sense that despite his achievements, something was missing. "I don't understand," he said, shaking his head as if arguing with an unseen presence. "I've done more than most could dream of. I've spread light, shared faith. And you say I doubt you doubt your purpose?" The voice cut in, gentle but sharp. "You doubt the source of your gifts. You doubt me." The words pierced him, laying bare every fear, every secret he'd buried. He sank to his knees before the altar, hands trembling. The warmth still enveloped him, not judging, but inviting him to face himself. "What do you want from me?" he whispered, his voice breaking. The crucifix seemed to glow brighter, and for a fleeting moment he felt Jesus' gaze lock onto his. He closed his eyes, tears streaming down his cheeks, though he couldn't say why. "See," the voice replied, simple but carrying a power he couldn't resist. "See beyond yourself. See the purpose for which you were created." Jonathan's eyes snapped open, his heart pounding. He didn't know what "see" meant, but the words ignited a spark in him, fear mixed with awe. He knelt there, time slipping away, the church's silence wrapping around him. It was no longer empty. It was alive, charged with a presence that lingered, gentle yet insistent, waiting for his next move. When he stood, his legs felt unsteady, as if they weren't his own. He glanced at the crucifix, half expecting it to shimmer again, but the figure of Jesus was still serene. He turned, walking slowly down the aisle, his footsteps echoing in the vast space. He didn't know where he was headed, only that he couldn't stay still. Everything he'd thought he knew about himself, his role as an actor, his faith, had been upended. That voice, that experience had changed him, and he knew his life would never be the same. Jonathan Roumie stepped out of the New Orleans church, the heavy oak doors thudding shut behind him. The humid night air clung to his skin, a stark contrast to the cool stillness inside. His long, wavy brown hair, slightly damp from the tension of the moment, brushed his shoulders as he adjusted his black suit jacket. The white shirt beneath was crisp, the large gold cross necklace at his chest catching the faint glow of a street lamp. The city's distant hum, jazz notes drifting from a nearby bar. The clatter of horse-drawn carriages felt far away, drowned out by the echo of the voice in his mind. See beyond yourself. His footsteps faltered on the stone steps, and he paused, staring into the empty street. What had just happened? He walked slowly, the weight of the experience pressing down on him. The voice, gentle, commanding, undeniable, had shaken him to his core. Jonathan, a man who'd spent years portraying Jesus, who'd prayed and spoken of faith to millions, had always believed he understood his purpose. But those words, "You doubt me," had cracked something open. He felt exposed, as if the voice had seen every corner of his soul, his pride in his work, his quiet fears of not doing enough, his moments of questioning whether his faith was as strong as he portrayed. He shoved his hands into his pockets, the gold cross necklace swaying slightly, and kept walking, unsure where he was going. Back at his hotel, a small boutique place near the French Quarter, Jonathan sat on the edge of his bed, the room bathed in the soft glow of a single lamp. The city skyline sparkled through the window, but his eyes were fixed on the small Bible he always carried. He hadn't opened it yet, afraid of what he might find or not find. The voice had said, "You've touched the stars, but ignored the ground beneath your feet." What did that mean? He'd spent years sharing stories of Jesus, inspiring others through the chosen. Hadn't that been enough? Hadn't he been walking the path he was meant to? He stood and paced his reflection, catching in the mirror. Long brown hair, bearded face, the gold cross gleaming against his chest. He looked like the man the world knew, the actor who embodied faith. But inside, he felt like a stranger. The voice had called him a vessel, not a creator, and that stung. He'd taken pride in his work, in the way his performances moved people, in the messages he shared. Was it possible he'd been glorifying himself more than the one he served? The thought made his stomach twist. Jonathan sank into a chair, running a hand through his hair. He tried to rationalize the experience. Maybe it was stress, long filming days, constant travel, the pressure of being a public figure of faith. But the clarity of the voice, the warmth that had enveloped him, couldn't be dismissed as fatigue. It had felt real, more real than anything he'd known. He opened his Bible, flipping to John's Gospel, hoping for guidance. His eyes landed on a verse, "I am the way, the truth, and the life." He'd recited those words countless times on set, but now they felt like a challenge. Was he truly following the way, or had he been chasing his own version of it? His phone buzzed on the nightstand, pulling him from his thoughts. A message from his friend Clara, a producer on The Chosen. "You okay? You seemed off at the last shoot." Jonathan hesitated, his fingers hovering over the screen. How could he explain what had happened? That he'd walked into a church and heard a voice he believed was Jesus. Even to Clara, who shared his faith, it sounded absurd. He typed a quick reply, "Just tired, I'll call tomorrow," and set the phone down. He wasn't ready to share this, not yet. The next morning, Jonathan attended a charity breakfast in New Orleans, organized to support local youth programs. He wore the same black suit jacket, white shirt, and gold cross necklace, his hair tied back to keep it neat. The event was lively, with volunteers bustling and kids laughing, but Jonathan felt detached, the voice still echoing in his mind. During a quiet moment, he confided in an organizer named Michael, a middle-aged man with a warm smile. "Something happened last night." Jonathan said, his voice low. "I was in a church alone and I heard something. A voice. It told me I was made for more. Michael raised an eyebrow, not skeptical, but curious. A voice like in your head, Jonathan shook his head. Not exactly. It was inside me, but real. It said I've been missing my purpose. Michael leaned back, thoughtful. Sounds like you got a wake-up call. Sometimes God speaks when we're not expecting it. What are you going to do about it? The question lingered as Jonathan left the breakfast. He wandered through the French Quarter, passing street musicians and colorful storefronts, the gold cross necklace glinting in the sunlight. Michael's words echoed the voice's challenge. What are you going to do? He didn't know, but the restlessness inside him was growing. He stopped at a small park, sitting on a bench under a sprawling oak. The voice had said to see, but see what? The faces of those he'd inspired through his work, the ones he hadn't reached. He closed his eyes trying to pray, but the words felt stuck, as if he needed to understand something first. That evening, Jonathan returned to the church. The same oak doors creaked as he entered the candlelight, casting familiar shadows. He wore his black suit jacket, the gold cross necklace heavy against his chest. The crucifix loomed above the altar, its presence both comforting and daunting. He knelt, hoping the voice would return, but the silence was deafening. I'm here, he whispered, his voice raw. Show me what to see. No answer came, but the warmth he'd felt the night before lingered, faint but present, like a spark waiting to ignite. As he knelt, a memory surfaced, filming a scene for The Chosen, when he'd spoken Jesus' words to a crowd. Come to me, all you who are weary, and I will give you rest. He'd delivered the line with conviction, but now he wondered if he truly understood it. Had he been offering rest to others while carrying his own burdens? The voice had said he doubted its source. Maybe that was the key, not doubting his faith, but doubting whether he'd fully surrendered to it. Jonathan stood, his eyes fixed on the crucifix. The silence wasn't empty. It was expectant, urging him to act. He didn't have answers, but he felt a shift, a call to look beyond his achievements, his role, his image. The voice had planted a seed, and though he couldn't see its shape, he knew it was growing. He left the church, the night air warm against his face, his steps steadier now. Whatever this was, it wasn't over. The voice had spoken, and he was beginning to listen. Jonathan Roumie walked through the vibrant streets of New Orleans, the morning sun casting long shadows across the cobblestone paths of the French Quarter. His long, wavy brown hair was tied back loosely, his beard framing a face etched with quiet intensity. He wore his familiar black suit jacket over a white shirt, the large gold cross necklace glinting as it caught the light. The city pulsed with life, street vendors, calling out tourists, snapping photos, the faint strum of a guitar nearby. But Jonathan's mind was elsewhere, tethered to the voice that had spoken in the church 2 nights ago. See beyond yourself. The words were a riddle, a challenge he couldn't shake. He'd returned to his routine, or tried to. Meetings with local charity organizers, phone calls with The Chosen team, and preparations for an upcoming speaking event filled his days. But the voice lingered, coloring every moment. At a cafe near Jackson Square, he sat with a coffee, his Bible open but unread. The warmth he'd felt in the church hadn't faded. It simmered within him like a quiet flame, urging him to act. Yet act on what the voice had said. He was a vessel, not the creator. But what did that mean for a man who'd built his life on portraying faith? He rubbed the gold cross necklace between his fingers, its weight grounding him as his thoughts spiraled. A text from Clara, his producer friend, buzzed on his phone. You sure you're okay? You've been quiet. Jonathan stared at the screen, tempted to tell her about the church, the voice, the call to see. But the words felt too raw, too fragile. He typed back, just reflecting. I'll catch up soon. He set the phone down, his eyes drifting to the cathedral across the square. Its spires loomed, a reminder of the sacred space where everything had changed. He knew he couldn't keep this to himself forever, but how could he share something so personal, so unprovable? That afternoon, Jonathan visited a community center where he'd promised to read to kids. Dressed in his black suit jacket, white shirt, and gold cross necklace, he sat in a circle of children, his voice warm as he brought stories to life. But his mind wandered to the voice's challenge. You've touched the stars but ignored the ground beneath your feet. One girl with bright eyes and a gap-toothed smile asked him, do you ever talk to Jesus for real? The question caught him off guard, echoing his own experience. He smiled, masking his unease. "I try to listen," he said, "and sometimes I think he answers." The girl nodded, satisfied, but Jonathan felt a pang. Was he listening now, or was he running from what he'd heard? Later, alone in his hotel room, Jonathan knelt by the window, the city's lights twinkling below. His hair fell loose around his shoulders, the gold cross necklace resting against his chest. He prayed not with the polished words he used in public, but with a raw honesty that felt foreign. "I don't know what you want," he whispered. "You said to see, but I'm blind. Help me understand." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was heavy with expectation, as if the voice was waiting for him to take a step. Then it came, not the voice, but something else. As Jonathan closed his eyes, a vision unfolded, vivid and overwhelming. The hotel room vanished, replaced by a boundless light that stretched in every direction. His breath caught, his heart racing. Images formed in the light, faces, places, moments frozen in time. He saw people he'd touched through The Chosen, a woman who'd found faith after watching a man who'd reconciled with his family, a child who'd prayed for the first time. Their gratitude warmed him, but the vision shifted. New faces appeared, those he hadn't reached, those lost in the margins of his busy life. A homeless man he'd passed without a glance. A struggling actor he'd brushed off, a fan's letter he'd never answered. The weight of their unseen stories pressed down heavy and humbling. Jonathan gasped, the vision fading, as the hotel room snapped back into focus. He was still kneeling, tears wet on his cheeks. The voice hadn't spoken, but the message was clear. His purpose wasn't just to shine on a screen, but to see the unseen, to reach those he'd overlooked. He clutched the gold cross necklace, its edges biting into his palm. "I thought I was doing enough," he murmured. "I thought I was serving you." The silence held no judgment, only a gentle nudge to keep looking. The next day, Jonathan attended a small prayer group at a New Orleans parish, hoping for clarity. He wore his black suit jacket, white shirt, and gold cross necklace, his hair neatly tied back. The group, a mix of locals and visitors, shared stories of faith, but Jonathan stayed quiet, his mind replaying the vision. During a break, an older woman named Evelyn approached him. Her tan skin and short silver hair framed a face full of quiet wisdom, her navy dress simple but elegant. "You look like you're carrying something heavy," she said, her voice kind. "Want to share?" Jonathan hesitated, then spoke, his voice low. "I had an experience in a church. A voice told me I'm meant for more, and last night I saw something, people I've helped, people I've ignored. I don't know what to do with it." Evelyn's eyes softened. "Sounds like you're being called to see with new eyes, not just the big moments, but the small ones, the ones no one notices." Her words echoed the voices, and Jonathan felt a spark of recognition. Maybe this was what see meant, not just to look, but to truly notice. He left the prayer group with a new resolve, though it was tinged with fear. Sharing his experience felt risky. People might doubt him, mock him, or worse, dismiss him as unhinged. He was Jonathan Roumie, the man who played Jesus, not a mystic claiming divine encounters. Yet the vision, the voice, the warmth, they were undeniable. He walked to the Mississippi River's edge, the sun setting in a blaze of orange and pink. His black suit jacket felt heavy, the gold cross necklace, a steady reminder of his faith. He closed his eyes, letting the river's gentle lapping calm him. "I'll try," he whispered. "I'll try to see." That night, back in his hotel, Jonathan opened his laptop. His fingers hovered over the keys, the urge to write growing. Not a script or a speech, but something honest. He began typing the words, slow at first. "2 nights ago, I walked into a church and heard a voice. It wasn't in my head, it was in my soul. It told me I was made for more, that I've been missing the ground beneath my feet." He paused, his heart pounding. This was the first step, a small act of obedience to the call. He didn't know who would read it or how they'd react, but he felt the flame within him grow brighter, urging him forward. Jonathan Roumie stood at the edge of a small New Orleans stage, the spotlight warm against his skin. His long, wavy brown hair was neatly tied back, his beard, framing a face caught between resolve and uncertainty. He wore his black suit jacket over a crisp white shirt, the large gold cross necklace resting prominently at his chest, catching the light with every slight movement. The community center buzzed with anticipation, filled with locals, fans, and curious visitors who'd come to hear him speak about faith and the chosen. But tonight wasn't about his usual talks. The words he'd typed in his hotel room, the confession of the voice, the vision, the call to see burned in his mind, demanding to be shared. His hands gripped the podium, the weight of the moment pressing down. The past week had been a whirlwind. After posting his brief raw account online, Jonathan had watched it ripple outward. Messages poured in, some from fans moved to tears, others from skeptics questioning his sanity. He'd expected the mixed reactions, but the sheer volume overwhelmed him. Sitting in his hotel, his black suit jacket slung over a chair, and the gold cross necklace glinting in the lamplight, he'd scrolled through comments late into the night. One stood out: "I've been lost for years. Your words made me feel seen." It was from a woman named Sarah, a single mother in Chicago. Her message echoed the vision's faces, those he hadn't reached, and fueled his resolve to speak out. Now facing the crowd, Jonathan felt the flame within him flicker. He'd spoken to thousands before, but this was different. This wasn't about acting or inspiration. It was about truth, unpolished and vulnerable. He cleared his throat, his voice steady but soft. "I'm not here to preach," he began, "or to tell you I have all the answers. I'm here to share something that happened to me." The room hushed, eyes fixed on him. He took a breath, the gold cross necklace a steady anchor, and recounted the night in the church, the voice, the warmth, the challenge to see beyond himself. He described the vision, the faces of those he'd touched and those he'd overlooked, the humbling realization that his purpose was bigger than his role. As he spoke, Jonathan's gaze swept the crowd. A young man in the front row nodded, his eyes bright with recognition. An older woman, her tan skin and short silver hair, reminiscent of Evelyn from the prayer group, smiled gently, her navy dress catching the light. Their presence grounded him, reminding him why he was here. "The voice told me I'm a vessel," he continued, "not the creator. I've spent years sharing faith, but I've missed the ground beneath my feet, the people right in front of me, the ones who need hope the most." His voice cracked slightly, but he pressed on, the words flowing like a prayer. When he finished, the room was silent for a moment, then erupted in applause. Jonathan stepped back, his heart pounding, the gold cross necklace heavy against his chest. He hadn't expected the response to feel so raw, so real. As the crowd dispersed, people approached him, some to thank him, others to share their own stories. A teenager named Marcus, with a shy smile, said, "I stopped praying a while ago, but you made me want to try again." Jonathan clasped the boy's shoulder, his own doubts quieted by the connection. This was what the voice meant by see, not just to notice, but to act, to bridge the gaps he'd ignored. The next day, Jonathan walked along the Mississippi River, the late afternoon sun painting the water gold. His black suit jacket was unbuttoned, his white shirt slightly rumpled, the gold cross necklace swaying as he moved. The speech had shifted something in him, but it also raised new questions. Would sharing his story change how people saw him? Would they see a man of faith or a performer chasing a moment? He sat on a bench, watching barges drift by, and pulled out his phone. Clara had texted, "Heard about your talk. People are buzzing. You okay with this?" He smiled faintly, typing back, "It's scary, but it feels right." He opened his social media, where his post had gained traction. Among the supportive comments were harsher ones. "Stick to acting, not preaching. Sounds like a publicity stunt." The criticism stung, but it didn't deter him. The vision's faces, Sarah, Marcus, the unseen others, kept him grounded. He began drafting another post, his fingers steady. "I don't have all the answers, but I know this: we're all called to see each other, to lift each other up. That's the purpose I'm chasing now." He hit send the act, feeling less like a leap and more like a step forward. That evening, Jonathan attended a dinner hosted by the parish, a gathering of community leaders and faith advocates. Dressed in his black suit jacket, white shirt, and gold cross necklace, his hair loose around his shoulders, he listened as others shared their work, soup kitchens, youth programs, addiction recovery. Evelyn, the woman from the prayer group, was there, her navy dress elegant in the candlelit room. She caught his eye, nodding as if she knew the weight he carried. During a quiet moment, she leaned over. "You're doing it," she said softly. "You're seeing. Keep going." Her words, simple but sure, reignited the warmth in his chest. The dinner conversation turned to purpose, and Jonathan found himself speaking unprompted. "I used to think my role was enough, playing Jesus, sharing stories," he said, his voice earnest. But I'm learning it's about the small moments, the people we pass by. That's where faith lives. The table fell quiet. Then a pastor named David spoke up. You're right, he said. It's not about the stage, it's about the heart. The affirmation settled over Jonathan like a blessing, easing the fear that he was stepping too far from his known path. As he left the dinner, the New Orleans night wrapped around him, warm and alive with distant music. His black suit jacket hung open, the gold cross necklace, a steady presence. He felt lighter, as if sharing his story had loosened a knot within him. But the journey wasn't over. The voice had called him to more, and he knew the path ahead would test him. He stopped by the church again, its oak doors as imposing as ever. Inside, the candlelight flickered, the crucifix watching silently. He knelt, his hair falling forward, and whispered, I'm trying to see. Show me what's next. The silence held no voice this time, but the warmth remained steady and sure. Jonathan stood, his resolve growing. He'd shared his truth with a room, then the world, but this was only the beginning. The vision's faces, the voice's call, they were guiding him towards something greater, something he couldn't yet fully grasp. As he stepped back into the night, his footsteps echoed with purpose, carrying him toward a future he was ready to embrace, whatever it held. Jonathan Roumie stood on the steps of the New Orleans church, the night air thick with the scent of magnolias and the distant hum of the city. His long, wavy brown hair framed his face, his beard catching the faint glow of a street lamp. He wore his black suit jacket over a crisp white shirt, the large gold cross necklace resting against his chest, a steady reminder of the journey that had brought him here. Weeks had passed since the voice first spoke, since the vision of faces, those he'd touched and those he'd overlooked, had reshaped his heart. Now, as he prepared to speak to a larger crowd, the words, "See beyond yourself," pulsed within him, not as a challenge, but as a calling. He took a deep breath, his footsteps echoing as he walked toward a new chapter. The response to his story had grown beyond anything he'd imagined. His posts, his speeches at the community center, had spread across social media, drawing both praise and skepticism. In his hotel room, dressed in his black suit jacket and gold cross necklace gleaming, Jonathan had read messages from strangers, people like Sarah, the single mother, and Marcus, the teenager, who'd resumed praying. Their words fueled him, but the criticism cut deep. He's lost it, just another actor seeking attention. Yet the warmth from the church, the vision's clarity, kept him steady. He wasn't doing this for applause. He was doing it to obey the voice that had called him to more. Tonight, he was set to speak at a large auditorium in New Orleans, a gathering organized by local faith leaders inspired by his story. As he arrived, the crowd's energy was palpable, hundreds of faces, young and old, filling the seats. Jonathan, his hair tied back and gold cross necklace catching the stage lights, stepped to the microphone. His black suit jacket felt like armor, but his heart was open, vulnerable. I'm not here as an actor or a preacher, he began, his voice clear and earnest. I'm here as a man who heard a voice in a church, a voice that told me I was made for more, not for my own glory, but for something greater. The room was silent, hanging on his words. Jonathan shared the night in the church, the vision of faces, the call to see the unseen. I thought my role as Jesus was enough, he said, his voice softening. But I was missing the people right in front of me, the ones who need hope, who feel forgotten. We're all vessels, not creators, and our purpose is to lift each other up. He paused, his eyes sweeping the crowd, catching Evelyn's familiar face in the third row. Her tan skin and short silver hair glowing under the lights, her navy dress a quiet elegance. Her nod gave him strength. As he spoke, Jonathan felt the warmth from the church return, steady and sure. The voice told me to see, he continued, and I'm learning that means noticing the small moments, a kind word, a listening ear, a hand extended. That's where faith lives. The crowd erupted in applause, but Jonathan barely heard it. His focus was on the message, on the faces in the vision, Sarah, Marcus, and countless others he might never meet. As he stepped off the stage, people approached, sharing stories of renewed faith, of small acts inspired by his words. A woman named Grace, her eyes teary, said, I called my estranged sister because of you. We're talking again. Jonathan clasped her hand, the gold cross necklace, swaying, his heart full. The next morning, Jonathan walked along the Mississippi River, the sun rising in a blaze of pink and gold. His black suit jacket was slung over his shoulder, his white shirt slightly unbuttoned, the gold cross necklace catching the dawn's light. The city felt alive, its rhythm mirroring the purpose growing within him. He'd spoken to hundreds, but the work wasn't done. The voice had called him to reach further, to use his platform not for fame, but for connection. He pulled out his phone, drafting a new post. The greatest purpose isn't in what we build, but in who we see. Let's keep looking together. He hit send the act now, familiar, a bridge to those waiting to be noticed. Back in his hotel, Jonathan knelt by the window, his hair loose and the gold cross necklace resting against his chest. He prayed not for answers, but for courage. "Thank you for this calling," he whispered. "I don't know if I'm enough, but I trust you'll guide me." The silence was warm, not empty, as if the voice was listening. He thought of Evelyn's words, "Keep going," and of the vision's faces, a reminder that his journey was theirs too. He rose, a quiet strength settling over him, ready for whatever came next. Weeks later, Jonathan's message continued to spread. He spoke at more events, not as the actor the world knew, but as a man transformed. In a quiet moment at a Los Angeles studio filming The Chosen, he stood on a set resembling Galilee, his black suit jacket replaced by a robe, but the gold cross necklace still at his chest. The stars overhead felt closer, a nod to the voice's challenge to touch them while staying grounded. Between takes, he shared his story with castmates, their questions mirroring his own. How do you know it was real? What does it mean to see? He answered honestly, his words unpolished but true, the warmth within him guiding each one. One evening back in New Orleans, Jonathan returned to the church where it all began. The oak doors creaked as he entered, the candlelight casting familiar shadows. His black suit jacket was buttoned, his hair loose, the gold cross necklace a steady presence. He knelt before the crucifix, his serene gaze unchanged. "I'm seeing," he whispered, his voice steady. "I'm trying to live it. Thank you." No voice answered, but the warmth filled him, a quiet flame that had become part of who he was. As he stepped outside, the city's lights sparkled, a reflection of the stars above. Jonathan's journey wasn't over. It was unfolding, one step, one face, one moment at a time. He thought of Sarah Marcus Grace and the countless others his words had reached. The voice had called him to more, and he was answering not with grand gestures, but with the small, faithful acts of seeing. His black suit jacket swayed in the breeze, the gold cross necklace gleaming, a symbol of the purpose he now carried. He walked into the night, his heart light, knowing he wasn't alone, guided by a presence greater than himself, ready to inspire a world waiting to be seen.